And it's not going to be a short and shallow recession. It's going to be a severe one, but then they have a crash of the stock market, a crash of the bond market with interest rates going much higher, a crash of credit markets with the interest rates on private loans rising significantly. And that economic and financial crisis is going to be so damaging. And as I said, if you cannot raise taxes, cut spending, you have to use the inflation tax. In the UK, in US, in Europe, we're borrowing our own local currency. And if you had a bout of unexpected inflation, inflation can reduce the real value of nominal debt at fixed interest rates of long duration. But it's a tax. We're taxing creditors and savers to redistribute income and wealth to those who are borrowers and debtors. And it's a tax that actually is not even decided by a parliament or by a political government, but is decided by the central banks. So I do believe that actually, given the rise of debts, private and public, we are in what economists call a debt trap. There is so much private and public debt that there'll be an incentive to try to wipe it out with a bout of unexpected inflation. We don't want to raise taxes enough. We don't want to cut spending enough, so we're going to use the inflation tax to resolve this problem. It's a form of default, however. It's a capital levy on savers and creditors and all who hold public and private debt. Increases of inflation we've had in advanced economies like the UK, Europe, and US is driven in part by what people refer to as being bad policies, loose monetary, fiscal, and credit easing during the COVID crisis, too much for too long. But then we also had a series of negative aggregate supply shocks that reduced growth and increased the cost of production. The first one was the impact of COVID on production of goods and services, on the supply of labor, and on global supply chains. The second one was the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on commodity prices, oil, natural gas, food, fertilizer, industrial metals. And three, the zero COVID policy of China has led to further global supply bottlenecks. So it's a combination of bad policy and bad luck. In the case of the UK, there was also a self-inflicted wound because the decision of Brexit reduces potential growth from about 2% to maybe 1.5%. It increases the cost of production. You have less migration, you have frictions in international trade, and therefore it's also a stagflationary process. So on the supply side, we have these shocks, but over the medium term, there are other shocks that are medium-term stagflationary. Deglobalization, reshoring of manufacturing to high-cost countries, friendshoring, aging of population, restriction to migration, decoupling between US and China, global climate change, pandemic, cyber warfare, weaponizing our currencies as a tools of national and foreign policy, a backlash against income and wealth inequality. These are all factors that are more medium term. They're all stagflationary. They reduce potential growth, they increase the cost of production on the supply side. On the demand side, central banks are saying we're going to fight inflation at any cost, and we're going to go back to 2%. But in my view, they're not credible. They're going to blink, they're going to wimp out, because if they try to raise interest rates to fight inflation, not only they cause a hard landing, a recession, and it's not going to be a short and shallow recession, it's going to be a severe one, but then they have a crash of the stock market, a crash of the bond market with interest rates going much higher, a crash of credit markets with the interest rates on private loans rising significantly, and that economic and financial crisis is going to be so damaging, they're going to blink, they're going to monetize deficits, and as I said, if you cannot raise taxes, cut spending, you have to use the inflation tax. I usually say I'm not Dr. Doom, I'm Dr. Realist, but of course it's not as catchy to be called Dr. Realist. There are some upside, there are some downside. Unfortunately, I feel that for the last 20 years, we've been kicking the can down the road. We're putting our heads under the sun like ostriches, and we're not addressing the fundamental threats: economic, monetary, financial, political, geopolitical, technological, environmental, and health. There are major threats that are all connected with each other, and it's a slow-motion train wreck. There is no free lunch. For any problem, you have to incur short-term cost to improve these threats over the medium long term. And the political economy of reforms and of pain is that very few people are willing, as governments and countries and politicians, to accept the short-term pain for the long-term benefit, because those politicians are not going to be in power. So there is a bias about kicking the can down the road.